Imagine this. A queen watches her entire fleet burn from the deck of a fleeing ship. Behind her, 400 warships are being rammed, boarded, and set ablaze. Beside her stands the most powerful Roman general alive, the man who abandoned his army, his honor, and his war to chase her purple sails into the horizon. They are running, and they will never stop running. Actium, 31 BC. The sea battle that decided whether Rome would remain a republic or become an empire. The day Mark Antony threw away a lifetime of glory for a woman. The day Cleopatra gambled her dynasty on one roll of the dice and lost everything. This is not a battle. This is a suicide dressed in gold and perfume. The Mediterranean had never seen two forces like this. On one side, Octavian, the sickly nephew of Julius Caesar. A man who had never won a battle with his own hands, pale, thin, prone to illness, barely 30 years old. Rome's politicians mocked him as a boy playing at war. On the other side, Mark Antony, the greatest soldier Rome had produced since Caesar himself. A man who had fought in Gaul, crushed Brutus at Philippi, conquered the East. His body was a monument to war, scarred, massive, built for the weight of armor. By every measure of Roman manhood, Antony should have destroyed Octavian like a lion killing a lamb. But Antony had a weakness with coal-lined eyes and a throne on the Nile. Her name was Cleopatra. She was not beautiful. The ancient sources agree on this. Her nose was too strong, her face too sharp. But when Cleopatra spoke, men forgot what beauty meant. She had seduced Julius Caesar when she was 21, bearing him a son. She had summoned Mark Antony to Tarsus and arrived on a golden barge with purple sails, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Within days, the conqueror of the East was following her to Alexandria like a dog on a silk leash. For 10 years, Antony had abandoned Rome for Cleopatra's bed. He had given her Roman territories. He had declared her son by Caesar the true heir of Rome. He had staged a ceremony in Alexandria where he sat beside her on golden thrones, distributing kingdoms to their children like party favors. Rome watched, Rome remembered, and Rome chose its side. Octavian did not need to be a warrior. He had something better: patience and propaganda. He read Antony's sealed will aloud in the Senate. It confirmed what Romans feared. Antony wanted to be buried in Alexandria, beside his foreign queen. He had betrayed Rome for Egypt. The Republic declared war, not on Antony directly, on Cleopatra, but everyone knew the truth. This war would decide who ruled the world. Antony assembled the greatest armada the ancient world had ever seen. 500 warships, many of them quinqueremes and larger, floating fortresses with towers, catapults, and bronze-plated rams. Some carried 10 banks of oars. They were built to crush, not to dance. Behind the fleet, 19 legions, over 100,000 of Rome's finest soldiers, veterans of a dozen campaigns, men who had marched with Antony through Parthia, Armenia, and Syria, and beside him, Cleopatra's Egyptian fleet, 60 warships with purple sails and gilded sterns. Her war chest held 20,000 talents of gold, enough to pay every soldier in the Mediterranean for years. On papyrus, Antony's forces looked invincible, but papyrus does not show rot. Antony made his first mistake before a single sword was drawn. He chose to fight at Actium. Actium was a narrow gulf on the western coast of Greece, a defensive position, a place to wait. But Antony was not built for waiting. He was built for charging. His fleet anchored inside the gulf. His army camped on the southern promontory. He planned to lure Octavian into a decisive land battle, the kind of fight Antony had never lost. Octavian refused. Instead, Octavian's admiral, a freedman named Agrippa, began a campaign of strangulation. He seized the islands around Actium. He cut Antony's supply lines from Egypt. He raided the coastal towns that fed Antony's army. Week by week, the noose tightened. Disease came first. The swamps around Actium bred mosquitoes. Malaria swept through Antony's camp like a scythe through wheat. Soldiers who had survived 100 battles died shivering in their tents, calling for water that could not save them. Then came desertion. Roman officers began slipping away in the night, crossing to Octavian's camp. They brought secrets. They brought maps. They brought the growing certainty that Antony could not win. One of the deserters was Quintus Dellius, Antony's own envoy, the man who had first introduced Antony to Cleopatra. Even he could see the ending. Antony watched his army shrink. 70,000 became 60. 60 became 50. Every morning brought new empty tents, new graves, new absences, and still Cleopatra's purple sails remained anchored in the harbor. Some said she was the problem. Remove the queen, and the Roman officers would return. Send her back to Egypt, and the war could be won. Antony refused. He would not abandon her. But the real trap had not yet been revealed. Octavian had something Antony did not. Agrippa, Marcus Vipsanius. Agrippa was everything Octavian was not: a warrior, a builder, a naval genius who had already won 2 major sea campaigns. He was low-born, practical, and utterly loyal to his sickly master. While Antony decayed at Actium, Agrippa had been perfecting a weapon. It was called the harpax, a catapult-launched grappling hook that could seize an enemy ship from 30 meters away. Once the hook bit into timber, winches would drag the ships together, allowing Roman marines to board. Antony's massive warships were designed to ram and crush smaller vessels. But they were slow, clumsy. They needed space to maneuver, speed to build momentum. The harpax took away both. If Agrippa could hook one of Antony's giants, it would be swarmed before it could escape. Size would become a coffin. By late summer, Antony faced an impossible choice. His fleet was trapped inside the Gulf. His army was starving and sick. Octavian's forces grew stronger every day, while his own withered. He called a council of war. The options were bleak. Abandon the fleet. March the army overland to Macedonia. Fight Octavian on land where Antony's veterans might still prevail. Or fight at sea. Break through Octavian's blockade. Escape to Egypt with whatever ships survived. His generals begged for the land option. Forget the fleet. Forget Cleopatra. Fight like Romans. Canidius Crassus, his best commander, said it plainly. The sea is Agrippa's element. We cannot win there, but on land, no one defeats Mark Antony. Antony listened. Antony understood. And then he looked at Cleopatra. The queen would not abandon her fleet. 60 Egyptian warships represented her power, her treasury, her kingdom's pride. If she fled overland, she would arrive in Egypt as a refugee, not a ruler. More importantly, her war chest was on those ships. 20,000 talents of gold, the money that paid the army. Without the fleet, the army would starve. Without the money, the soldiers would mutiny. Without Cleopatra, Antony was just another Roman warlord with empty pockets. He chose the sea. His generals stared in disbelief. Canidius argued until his voice broke. The officers exchanged glances that said everything. Their commander was no longer commanding. He was following, and they were all going to die for it. The night before battle, Antony did something strange. He ordered the sails loaded onto the ships. In ancient naval warfare, sails were dead weight. You fought with oars. Speed and maneuverability came from rowers, not canvas. Loading sails meant you expected to run, not fight. When his captains questioned the order, Antony claimed the sails were for pursuing fleeing enemies. No one believed him. The truth was simpler and more terrible. Antony was not planning to win the battle. He was planning to escape it. Break through the blockade, hoist sails, run to Egypt, regroup and fight another day. It might have worked, if Cleopatra had not been Cleopatra. September 2nd, 31st BC. The morning dawned clear and hot. Antony's fleet rode out of the Gulf in 3 squadrons, his largest ships in the center, lighter ships on the flanks. Cleopatra's Egyptian squadron waited in reserve behind the line, 60 ships with purple sails furled and ready. Facing them, Agrippa's fleet, 400 ships, smaller, faster, crewed by sailors who had trained for this moment. They formed a crescent, waiting to envelope. For hours, nothing happened. The 2 fleets watched each other across the water. Antony waited for the afternoon wind that would fill his sails. Octavian waited for Antony to make a mistake. The sun climbed, the heat intensified, rowers baked at their oars. Finally, around noon, Antony's northern squadron began to move. They swung wide, trying to outflank Agrippa's line, trying to create a gap. Agrippa responded instantly. His ships surged forward, engaging. The trap had sprung, but on whom? The first collision was not a battle, it was a siege at sea. Agrippa's lighter ships swarmed Antony's giants. They did not ram. The bronze beaks would have shattered against those reinforced hulls. Instead, they circled. They launched the harpax. They grappled and boarded. Antony's massive vessels became prisons, too slow to escape, too clumsy to maneuver. Marines poured over the railings, and the decks became slaughterhouses. Fire arrows arced through the air. Braziers of burning pitch were catapulted onto decks. One by one, Antony's proud warships began to burn. The battle spread across the Gulf like a disease. Ship after ship locked together. Smoke rose in columns that could be seen for miles. And in the chaos, something happened that changed history. A gap opened in the center of the battle line. Cleopatra saw the gap. Her 60 Egyptian ships had been waiting behind the battle, untouched. Sails ready. The fighting had drawn both fleets toward the flanks, leaving the center thin. A path to the open sea, a path to Egypt, a path to survival. Did she panic? Did she plan this? Did Antony give her a signal? The ancient sources disagree. Some say she fled in cowardice. Others say this was the plan all along. Escape with the treasury. Let Antony's ships be the sacrifice. What is certain, Cleopatra hoisted her purple sails and ran. Her 60 ships caught the afternoon wind and drove straight through the gap. They did not fire a shot. They did not help a single Roman vessel. They sailed for Egypt as if the burning fleet behind them was someone else's problem. And Mark Antony, the greatest soldier of his generation, watched those purple sails disappear toward the horizon. He had a choice: stay and fight, rally his men. Die like a Roman. He chose Cleopatra. Antony transferred to a faster ship. He abandoned his flagship, his fleet, and his men. He ordered his rowers to chase the purple sails. Behind him, his captains saw their general fleeing. The man who had given the orders, who had promised victory, who had asked them to trust him, running toward Egypt like a whipped dog. What do you do when your God abandons you? Some ships kept fighting. Loyalty or confusion, or simple inability to escape. They burned or surrendered, or were dragged under by grappling hooks. Others tried to follow Antony. Most were caught, boarded, captured. A few captains managed to beach their ships and escape overland. They would bring the news to the army waiting on shore. Your general has fled. Your fleet is destroyed. You are alone. By nightfall, the Battle of Actium was over. Octavian had lost almost nothing. Antony had lost almost everything. The numbers were catastrophic. 200 of Antony's ships destroyed or captured, 5,000 of his sailors dead, his entire northern squadron annihilated, his admiral killed in the fighting. But the true loss was not in numbers, it was in faith. The next morning, Antony's 19 legions woke to find their fleet gone and their general vanished. Canidius Crassus, the army commander, tried to rally them. "March east," he said. "Regroup in Syria. The war is not over." But the soldiers had seen the purple sails. They had heard the rumors. Their general had chosen a woman over Rome. Why die for a man who would not die for you? The army held for 7 days. 7 days of waiting for orders that never came. 7 days of watching Octavian's forces gather on the opposite shore. On the 8th day, Canidius Crassus slipped away in the night. He fled to Egypt, abandoning the army he had commanded. When dawn came and the soldiers found their last general gone, something broke. Not their bodies, their belief. The legions surrendered. 19 legions, 100,000 men. They simply walked across the lines and swore allegiance to Octavian. Not a sword was raised, not a drop of blood spilled. The greatest army in the East dissolved like salt in water. Octavian had won the war without fighting a single land battle. On the ship fleeing to Egypt, Antony sat alone at the prow. For 3 days, he did not speak. He did not eat. He did not visit Cleopatra's cabin. He stared at the sea and the wake behind them, as if he could see his honor dissolving in the foam. He had been the heir of Caesar, the conqueror of the East, the man who should have ruled the world. Now he was a fugitive, a fool who had abandoned his army for a woman who had abandoned a battle. History would remember him not as a warrior, but as a warning. When they reached Alexandria, Cleopatra tried to rally him. They still had Egypt. They still had gold. They could raise new armies, hire new fleets, fight again. Antony listened, but the fire was gone from his eyes. He built a small dwelling on a pier extending into the harbor. He called it the Timonium, after Timon of Athens, the famous misanthrope who hated all mankind. There he sat, day after day, watching the ships come and go, waiting for the end he knew was coming. Octavian took his time. He did not need to hurry. Antony was broken. Cleopatra was trapped. Egypt was a fruit that would fall into his hands whenever he chose to shake the tree. First, he consolidated Greece, then Syria, then the eastern provinces. One by one, Antony's former allies switched their allegiance. Client kings who had sworn eternal loyalty discovered new eternities. By the summer of 30th BC, Octavian's legions were marching toward Egypt. By July, they stood at the gates of Alexandria, and Cleopatra, the queen who had gambled everything, began to calculate her final move. Would she die as a queen, or live as a prisoner in Octavian's triumph? Cleopatra sent secret messages to Octavian. She offered treasure. She offered submission. She offered Antony's head, if that was the price of survival. Octavian listened, but made no promises. He wanted Egypt intact. He wanted its grain to feed Rome. But he also wanted Cleopatra, alive, in chains, walking behind his chariot in a Roman triumph. The queen who had humiliated Rome would be Rome's ultimate trophy. When Antony learned of the secret negotiations, what remained of his heart shattered. The woman he had given everything for was bargaining with his life. He did not rage. He did not weep. He simply gathered his last loyal soldiers and prepared for one final battle. The defense of Alexandria lasted 1 day. Antony led a cavalry charge that briefly drove back Octavian's advance guard. For one moment, he was the old Antony again, fierce, fearless, laughing at death. But when he returned to the city, he found his fleet surrendering without a fight, his soldiers throwing down their weapons, his allies melting away like morning frost. Cleopatra had locked herself in her mausoleum, the tomb she had built for herself, filled with treasure and flammable materials. A messenger told Antony she was dead. It was a lie, or a test, or a final manipulation. We will never know. Antony did not question it. He drew his sword and drove it into his own stomach. But Roman swords were designed for stabbing, not slicing. The wound was terrible but not immediately fatal. Antony lay bleeding on the floor when another messenger arrived. The queen was alive. She wanted to see him. They carried Antony to Cleopatra's mausoleum. She would not open the doors. She feared a trap. Instead, her servants lowered ropes from an upper window. They hauled him up, bleeding, dying, hand over hand. Cleopatra pulled him through the window with her own arms. He died in her lap. His last words, according to the sources, were advice. Do not pity me, remember our happiness, and do not trust Octavian. She kissed his bloody lips and closed his eyes. The greatest soldier of his generation died in a tomb, hoisted through a window like luggage, in the arms of the woman who had destroyed him, or saved him from a worse fate. It depends on how you tell the story. Cleopatra survived Antony by 11 days. She negotiated with Octavian. She charmed him, or tried to. The same weapons that had conquered Caesar and Antony were deployed against the cold young heir of Rome. Octavian was immune. He wanted her alive for his triumph. Nothing more. When Cleopatra realized she would be paraded through Rome in chains, exhibited like an exotic animal, mocked by the mob, she made her choice. The asp was smuggled in with a basket of figs. Or perhaps it was poison hidden in a hairpin. The method is disputed. The result is not. Cleopatra VII, last pharaoh of Egypt, died on August 12th, 30th BC. She was 39 years old. She had ruled for 22 years. She had loved two of Rome's greatest men and outlived them both. Her children by Antony were spared. Her son by Caesarion, was not. Octavian had him strangled. There could be only one heir of Caesar. Egypt became a Roman province. Its grain fed Rome for centuries. Its treasures filled Octavian's coffers. Its gods were added to Rome's collection. Octavian returned home and became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The Republic died with Antony. The empire was born from his corpse. For 2,000 years, historians have asked, was Cleopatra a villain or a victim? Was Antony a fool or a romantic? Was Actium a battle or an escape? Perhaps it was all of these. Perhaps it was none. What is certain is this. The world before Actium had room for many powers. The world after had room for only one. And it was built on the bones of a queen and the broken heart of a soldier who loved her.